Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Steven SCHOEFS. I'm the editor-in-chief of Global Fleet and Fleet Europe, and I have the pleasure to present to you today the state of the fleet market in Europe. In about 10 minutes time, I will shed light about the organization of the fleet marketplace. And I would like to start with putting things quite simple. The evolution of the European fleet market can be reduced to two key drivers: the search for efficiencies and cost savings on the one hand, and the impact of the continuously changing taxation and regulation schemes on an EU level, but also on a country level and even on a city level. Now, Europe is known for having a combination of both a job need, a functional fleet, and also a benefit fleet. And the latter makes Europe quite a unique region, for sure compared to North America. The concept of car as a benefit came to life at the end of the 70s, as you see on your screen. First in the UK and driven by taxation. The taxation on company cars was less than the taxation on salary. Therefore, it made perfect sense for both the employer and the employee to opt for a company car. And the growth of vehicles in these companies, combined with the awareness that a company car is an attractive employee benefit, gave multinational companies also the idea to expand the principle across other markets in Europe and more specifically in Western Europe, as you see on the screen. This trend has only accumulated throughout the 90s, where international fleet management came into place. Rather than managing country by country, European fleets were consolidated and the position of the European fleet manager was created. And as these multinational companies didn't have the exact knowledge, nor the resources or the time to manage a very big fleet, and they didn't want to focus on something that was not really a core business for the company, outsourced fleet management emerged with full service or operational leasing, and I will come back on that later, being the preferred funding method for multinational companies in Europe. Let's now look at the vehicle fleet market. Today, the vehicle fleet market in Europe counts almost 4.7 million passenger cars and light commercial vehicles, which is roughly 27.5% of total sales in 2020. Of course, 2020 was a very particular year also in Europe, and that is reflected in a serious drop in sales. Nonetheless, the vehicle fleet market in Europe has always been growing steadily, and today it has quite a stable and important size. And if you compare the European fleet market with about 10 years ago, then it has even doubled in size. And the biggest fleet markets, probably no surprise, are also the biggest economies. Germany being number one, UK number two, followed by France, Italy, and Spain. But also Belgium, a smaller country, is still a very attractive fleet management and lease market because of its company car taxation scheme. And Poland, a growing economy in Central Europe, has become an important vehicle fleet market as well. Now, the strong benefit car market also implies a user-chooser concept where the driver has certain liberty of choice, and that brings a variety of car brands and models. But there are some trends. Europeans, as you can see on the screen, love European brands. We see a very strong performance overall of the brands of the Volkswagen Group, but also Renault, and for example, the new Constellation, Stellantis, with the brands of PSA and FCA Group, have a very solid fleet presence across Europe. Model-wise, there has been a recent shift from sedan, but also hatchback, to SUV models, as they are, of course, a perfect fit both for professional and personal travel. And today, almost 1 in 3 fleet cars across Europe is an SUV model. Powertrain-wise, Europeans have always loved diesel technology, And coincidentally, European OEMs have always been the front runners of that diesel technology, while the European Union has steered car taxation around CO2 emission targets, with more than 20 EU countries today having CO2 as a key parameter in their company car taxation scheme. And as you know, CO2 is more in favor for diesel technology than it is for petrol technology. But times are, of course, changing also in Europe. We see that there is an interesting growth also in fleet performance from some challengers. Challengers like Tesla, Hyundai, Kia, and most recently Polestar, driven by their electric vehicle performance. Indeed, EV is a very important trend in Europe, also a trend that answers the changes in company car taxation schemes that more and more countries are now putting in place, and also a trend that reflects the willingness and the awareness of companies, their fleet managers, and their workforce and employees around climate change and sustainability. Last year, BEV fleet sales doubled and sales of plug-in hybrids even quadrupled. And you see the important drop of ICE vehicle sales in fleet. The consequence is that in 2019, there was one EV sold for every 39 ICE cars. In 2020, this was already one EV for 12 ICE cars. Did you know that last year, more than 70% of new car sales in Norway, for example, was emission friendly and electrified? In Germany, it was almost 15%, and in France, 11%. So you clearly see a trend towards electrification in Europe. And that trend is here to stay and will only accelerate in the upcoming years, with more and more multinational companies aiming for zero emission operations. And in addition, more and more governments and cities, about 300 already in Europe, having low emission zones in place and applying quite severe restrictions for other than zero mobility. Now, let's take a look at the way these vehicles are funded and financed. As mentioned before, operational leasing or full service leasing is the preferred funding method for most multinational companies in Europe. In fact, full service leasing counts for about 45 to 48% of corporate sales in Europe. The biggest leasing companies are also the ones that are the most internationally organized. There are three really big ones: multi-brand leasing companies, LeasePlan, ALD Automotive, and Arval. Each of them have well over 1 million vehicles across Europe. Followed by two strong multi-brand lease companies that are owned by a car manufacturer, which is interesting. We have Alphabet, that is owned by the BMW Group, and there is Athlon, owned by Daimler. And also Volkswagen Financial Services, the financial arm of the Volkswagen Group, is now expanding its multi-brand offering, which is interesting to follow. To end, we would like to mention some interesting leasing companies that are a bit smaller, but that are expanding quite fast across Europe. For example, Hitachi Mobility Solutions and Leases, the captive of FCA Group. These international lease players dominate the fleet market in Europe, leaving little opportunity for local heroes to enter the international market. Apart from exceptions in the UK, where the biggest leasing company is Lex Autolease, and also in some countries closer to Eastern Europe, like, for example, Russia and Turkey. Finally, let me underline three important trends for the European fleet marketplace. And the first one is smart mobility, or the transformation from fleet to mobility. Because of zero emission targets, new regulation and taxation, the concept of working from home, and the changing consumer behavior in favor of usership instead of ownership, the emergence of mobility solutions that respond to the demand for flexible mobility is really accelerating. Flexibility both in the product, but also in the contract. And even if many of these solutions are still locally offered, and even if they are still in their infancy, it's clear that the younger generation and the younger workforce is open to experience shared mobility, micro mobility, two-wheel mobility, and e-mobility in a way that it's also incorporated in a mobility budget, so that there is certain flexibility to choose that mobility solution that fits their purpose. So the European fleet manager is becoming a mobility manager with a car policy that evolves to an inclusive and more hybrid mobility program with a focus on employee well-being. And also there is now a change, because it's not only fleet and procurement that has the decision taking. We now also see that departments like HR, travel, facility management, and even finance will play a more important role. And to manage smart and electric mobility and to give access to flexible forms of mobility, connectivity is crucial. And this is the third trend of the decade in Europe: connectivity. Connected technology allows the access and usage of more mobility options, and it also facilitates a better management as it contributes to the operational, the tactical, and strategic efficiency of fleet and mobility management. It is clear that partnerships of traditional suppliers like OEMs, leasing and rental companies, with technology companies and startups is the go-to model for smart mobility expansion. And it's obvious that the fleet manager in Europe will evolve to a fleet and mobility data manager. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you liked this presentation and of course enjoy the rest of the regional stream on Europe. And more information about the European fleet marketplace can be found on our website, fleeteurope.com. Thank you very much.